Quisqueya. It is rumored to be the ancient name of this island. But where does it come from? I'll present to you now the first time ever that the word appeared in human history. I think we're gonna have to talk about this. Let me show you something. This is the Behaim Globe. It is possibly the earliest globe showing what people thought the world was like in the 15th century. It was compiled based on various maps and reports by Martin von Behaim in 1492, about the same time that Christopher Columbus was exploring the New World. However, before he got back to talk about the New World, which is why the American continent is missing from the globe. We learned several very interesting things from this globe. First of all, people did not believe the Earth was flat. 2, a direct passage from Europe to Asia was possible. But nobody made the trip, before Columbus, because what's the point? And nobody's got the money anyway, and we're all way too busy with a lot more important stuff like fighting the Moors and persecuting Jews and the Holy Inquisition and all that. Exploring a new world? Ain't nobody got time for that. The third thing is, it was common knowledge that there was land between Europe and Asia, Cipangu and St. Brennan's Island. Now, I'm not going to get lost talking about St. Brennan's Island, supposedly a time-traveling island. See what I did there? Lost. So let's talk about Cipangu, 150 years before Christopher Columbus, the one man who started everything, Marco Polo. While now some accounts are disputed about Marco Polo's adventures, we do know that he stayed at the court of Kublai Khan, the ruler of the Mongol Empire, in what nowadays we know as China. And his book of his accounts of his travels, his adventures, became a bestseller. You see, Marco influenced what people knew of the Asian continent. Cipangu, for example, was a mysterious island off the coast of China, which he described as immensely wealthy and ruled by a great emperor or Khan. Cartographers took his word for it, which is why we can now find it on places like, for instance, the Behaim Globe. Behaim Globe.
What does all this have to do with Kiskeya?
I'm getting there. Guess who else was a huge fan of Marco Columbus? You see, we say in general terms that Christopher Columbus was trying to find India, but that's not entirely correct.
And once I find Cipangu, I will totally convince the Great Khan to align only with Spain, and we will totally disrupt the global spice biz.
Columbus was expecting to find the mysterious island of Cipangu and establish a trade route to Europe from it. Cipangu refers to what we nowadays know as Japan. Nobody really knows for certain, and therein lies the rub. You see, language is a funny thing. It changes so much that often the meanings are lost in time.
So what does this have to do with Kiskeya?
I'm getting there. Let's talk about the first voyage of Christopher Columbus. We know now he was specifically looking for the island of Cipangu. Well, of course, we know he never made it to Japan. Instead, he ended up here. But everywhere he went, he was looking for Cipangu. Anytime he met with any natives, he asked about Cipangu.
Cipangu? Cipangu, 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 Cipangu. Oh man, why can't y'all just speak Spanish like everybody else?
He was never really able to directly communicate with the locals because he didn't speak their language and they didn't speak his language. So it was all sign language and stuff. And I'm not just talking about the difference between the Spanish or Portuguese and the Taino language, but about the different Taino dialects that he encountered. However, on the island of Hispaniola, he made a linguistic breakthrough, or so he thought.
Cipangu.
Cibao?
Cibao? Cibao. Cipangu, Cibao.
That was the closest he ever got to finding a place with a similar name. In fact, he was so certain about that, later writings reflected that belief that what we know as Cibao, you may laugh now, he thought was the legendary kingdom of Cipangu.
So what does all of this have to do with Quisqueya?
I'm almost there, I promise. Let's review what we know about names and how Columbus found them. He couldn't understand the language, right? They apparently spoke about 4 different dialects of the Taino language. That's the other thing. We know so very little about the Taino dialect spoken here because the dialect or languages became extinct. So whatever we do know, we know from the writings from Spanish historians. The most common word that Christopher Columbus encountered when asking for the name of the island was Bohío. But we know nowadays that the word Bohío referred to either the village or the round houses or the huts that they lived in, their homes. So probably what happened is when Christopher Columbus asked, "What is this place?" they'd respond with, "Home?" Columbus never really figured out the name of, he stuck with the name that he gave the place. Little Spain, Hispaniola as we call it nowadays, and Cipangu being the area somewhere in the inside, yet to be explored. Okay, I know that was a long introduction, but you'll see it makes sense. Now we get to the Kiskeya part. The one word that Columbus never encountered was Kiskeya. So where then did it come from? If not from Columbus, from where? The first time it ever showed up in human history was in the book De Orbe Novo by one Peter Martyr de Anguera, an Italian chronicler working in Spain. Let's talk about the book, and then we'll talk about the man. The Orbe Novo roughly translates as Decades of the New World, and it's split into 10 decades, or large chapters, if you will. Now, the book itself is a collection of reports and letters that Peter had collected over the years, ranging from Christopher Columbus to Cortez. It would seem that he even corresponded with some of these people, particularly Christopher Columbus, because he wrote at the same time when Columbus was still doing his other explorations. Thus, much of what Peter wrote about came directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Now, kind of like the book of Marco Polo, this book became a huge influence because it gave people an insight into this new world that was being explored. In fact, the English translation from 1555, a few years later, was what influenced the English exploration of the New World. Think about that. Without that book, we may not be doing this blog in English, but maybe in Spanish, or Portuguese, or French, or Dutch. Now, the significance of this book cannot be overstated. Its reliability, however, most of what we know nowadays of the encounters between the old world and the new came from Peter, but that doesn't make it true. The first appearance of the word Quisqueya is in the 3rd decade, chapter 7. Nomina Hispaniolae a primis habitatoribus imposita fuere primum Quisqueya de inc Haiti. Sorry, did I forget to mention that the book was actually written in Latin? Yeah, you see, back then, everything important was usually written in Latin, the language of the educated class. Anyway, my Latin is by no means acceptable, you know? My knowledge may be from college, but my Latin is from Manhattan. So I'll dig up an English translation so we all can understand, all right? Hispaniola was first called by its early inhabitants Quisqueya, and afterwards Haiti. These names were not chosen at random, but were derived from natural features, for Quisqueya in their language means something large or larger than anything, and is synonym for universality, the whole, something in the sense that pan was used among the Greek. The islanders really believed that the island, being so great, comprised the entire universe, and that the sun warmed no other land than theirs and the neighboring islands. Thus they decided to call it Quisqueya. The name Haiti in their language means altitude, and because it describes a part, was given to the entire island. Now, you will notice a few things here. Firstly, the meaning of the word, something large and universal. Interesting how he compares it with the Greek word pan, as in pan-galactic gargle blaster. Very nerdy joke. But that's interesting. This is something Peter does a lot here. He's always comparing or relating things to ancient Greek, as if he's trying to appeal to the intellect of his readers, which is exactly what he was trying to do. You'll also notice how he mentions the word Haiti as meaning altitude, and that it was one of the names of the island, according to him. But in other areas, he mentions Haiti as being the name of only, well, the western area of the island. So it's a bit fuzzy on that, but for the most part, it seems to refer only to this side. Now, you may also notice the pronunciation of the word, Quisqueya, as opposed to Kiskeya. You see, in Spanish, Q-U-I becomes ki, right? But since this is a Latin word, it stays qui. But hold on, I can hear you say now. It's not a Latin word, it's Taino, right? Is it? Well, that brings us to the question as to where did he come up with that word in the first place? We learned that he got everything that he knows secondhand, most of the time verbally. Peter spent all of his time in the cozy courts of royalty and clergy, writing his books and being all intellectual and smarty-pants-like. Thus, we can say for certain that he never, ever heard a Taino actually say to him the word Quisqueya. Most of the Taino words that he wrote about, he only heard from others and wrote them down the way he understood it.
Okay, so what was the name again?
Quisqueya.
Okay, how do you spell that?
Quisqueya.
That sounds weird.
Quisqueya.
Is it a real name?
Quisqueya.
Are you making that up?
Quisqueya.
Sorry, would you mind taking your glasses off? You know what? Never mind. I'll go with what I got.
Did it really go down like that? Or did he, like others suggest, just make it up? It's hard to say. But in order to understand a little bit more, let's read on what he actually wrote. You see, Quisqueya appears 5 times in the whole book. We've already read 3 times. Now let's see the other 2. We have already said that Quisqueya and Haiti are the ancient names of the island. Some natives also call the island Sipangu from the name of a mountain range rich in gold. Sipangu? Sipangu. And he's implying that it is yet another Taino word. Furthermore, he writes, these islanders have given the names Quisqueya, Haiti, and Sipangu to their country. Our deeply intellectual and smarty-pants, Peter, he who continuously is trying to wow us with his knowledge of Greek history and other smarty-pant things, seemed not to have been aware of the writings of Marco. Now, a regular, illiterate sailor can be excused for this kind of error, but Peter, a guy equivalent to what we nowadays would call a scientist? I mean, this error would be equal to Stephen Hawking were to write this.
And thus the ancient people of North America called their land Canada, and also Endor, which in their language means realm of the annoying teddy bears.
Yep.
You see what I mean? What I'm trying to say here? Marco Polo's book was available in every big library. Most intellectuals, particularly those who are writing about travels, must have known about it. Maps and globes showed Sipangu. And yet at no point did Peter make any reference to Marco Polo. Gotcha. On the contrary, continued to insist that Sipangu is a Taino word. In fact, he mentions the word Sipangu as a name for the island more often than he mentions the word Quisqueya. Okay, so what does that tell us about the man? What does that tell us about the veracity of the word? Did he just make that word up? Did he misunderstand something? I'll leave that to your judgment. The final question thus, should we even use the word? Well, we can't be certain that it really is a Taino word, obviously. Nobody but Peter ever used it. So can we use it? Let's just remember that place names are simply words that we made up to describe a certain place. They were all made up at some point or another. Very often, names were misunderstood, misspelled, mislaid, mislabeled, misused, misuniverse, but they're still being used. I'm looking at you, Idaho. So now, 500 years after Peter made up the name whatever, I think it's safe to say that it's safe to use the word Quisqueya. Sorry, I meant to say, of course, as they say in Spanish and Creole, Kiskeya. Que lo que, mi gente? Thanks for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Now it's your turn. What do you think? What were the where did that word really come from? Did he really just make that word up? Did somebody else maybe make that word up? And if you want to know more, check out the links down below where you can find the research material that we used for this episode. Also, there's all these different footnotes that will give you more information, so you can, watch the video again and read all the footnotes. Apologies for all the close changes. I had to record this over several days. Man, I look like one of the new kids on the block. If you don't know who the new kids on the block are, ask your grandparents. Meanwhile, you can also check out our Patreon page, and you can check out a couple of more episodes that we've done in the past. And also, when you subscribe, because, you're gonna subscribe, because why wouldn't you, right? Hit the notification button. A little man is gonna jump up out of your computer and say,
Hey, remember, there's a new episode coming from Kiskeya.Life TV.
whoa, sorry. And well, that being said, thanks for watching, and see you guys in the next episode. Abur mi gente.